Great. Hi, everyone. This is Rick Hansen with the Global Compassion Coalition, and I'm here with my two friends, Rachel Ebanks Gold, co-host, and my dear friend, Marguerite Callaway, who is a very distinguished person. Rachel, in a moment, will share Marguerite's biography, but I just want to say that from the start, that for me, Marguerite, who is someone who has just a huge heart, completely committed to the welfare of the world, who is, through her work with management consulting and leadership development, also had a lot of involvement in Africa, which I think arguably will turn out to have been the most important continent in the world over the course of the 21st century. And so to think about the work that you've been doing there, Marguerite, is very touching for me. Along the way, you introduced me to Mempela Rempeli, an historic activist from South Africa, who is now the chair of the board of the Global Compassion Coalition. So I have many, many layers and tendrils and lovely fibers and threads of deep gratitude and connection with you, Marguerite. So I'm especially happy that you're here.
Well, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here because I span the globe, but you're also just down the road. I used to be able to attend some of your live meditations in San Rafael. So,
yeah.
We're all connected in one way or another. And isn't it amazing that we have something like the internet and globes that can be used? I look at technology as neutral. It can go either way. And it's just a delight to see what the Global Compassion Coalition is doing, which was your intention to create an alternative of interaction. So it's a pleasure, real pleasure. It's an honor. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, Margaret. So I'll just introduce you to our audience. So Marguerite Callaway is a highly accomplished and influential figure in leadership development. And as the CEO and founder of the Callaway Leadership Institute in Santa Rosa, California, she's been instrumental in providing international leadership development courses that empower leaders to achieve their goals effectively by identifying and cultivating their innate leadership potential. With a career spanning over 40 years, Ms. Callaway has amassed extensive practical leadership skills while holding significant roles in world-renowned healthcare organizations and international management consultancies. And since 2003, Ms. Callaway has been a part-time faculty member of the Graduate School USA and the Yale School of Public Health. And she's provided formal leadership and management training throughout the USA, China, the UK, and 11 African countries, both in person and virtually. And Ms. Callaway has founded the Callaway Leadership Institute in 2005, where she offers practical workshops and intensives to prepare executives and inspire aspiring leaders for the challenges of 21st century leadership, specifically in areas of transformational leadership, which I think we'll be touching on today. And alongside in-person client workshops and one-to-one coaching, the Institute offers topic-specific courses on transformational leadership, conflict resolution, and women's leadership programs. And this training emphasizes the importance of strategic and systems thinking, ethics, values, and emotional intelligence, all of which foster both personal and organizational transformation and growth. So we have a leader in leadership. So thank you so much for being here, Margaret. By the way, just for anyone watching live, if you do have any questions for Marguerite, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll hopefully have time to get those answered, because she is definitely an expert that we'd like to hear from. So please don't hesitate in doing that. So Marguerite, I thought we'd start this conversation. I thought it would be helpful to maybe just define what a leader is. So who are we talking about when we talk of leadership and leaders?
All right. Well, first of all, I think one of the things that I will say is that leadership in and of itself is a quality that we carry, and we tend to think leadership comes with a title. And in fact, leadership is a way of being as much as anything else. But so I'm going to try to give a historical perspective on that. But leaders are the people who can make a difference. Leaders are people that we turn to Now, you may have a title, you may not. Some people have never led anything, and yet they're some of the most significant thought leaders that we've ever had in the world that are bringing new ideas forward. So leaders are the people that initiate new things. They have certain innate qualities, but at the end of the day, and I'm going to focus on constructive leaders, positive leaders, because we have plenty of leaders who want to exploit the positions of power and authority for their own gains. But leaders are who want to make a positive difference in the world. But I really do want to distinguish between those who do it because they have a power and responsibility that has been given to them, and those who step into it and accept the responsibility.
Right, so very just kind of expanding the idea of leadership beyond just your typical maybe manager or head of an organization, but just kind of expanding it to people who want to create change, essentially, ready to kind of step forward and create new avenues of thinking. So thank you for that definition.
I was just jumping in, thinking that it's natural to think about leadership in organizational settings, governments, and so forth. How does leadership show up in families or couples? How would you think about that?
Well, I love how you bring up the notion of families and couples, because at the end of the day, we have, and so I want to distinguish, and I'm going to use some words that we're going to move beyond, but historically, there was always one person in charge of a family or one person in charge of a community. That was more the historical model of how we evolved as human beings. There had to be a chieftain. There had to be those kinds of individuals. But when you look underneath what leadership is, real leadership, it's those people who are willing to say, we need to do something here. And look, again, we need to do something positive here. And how do I bring people together? I will take on the personal responsibility of making sure that my family is safe. I will make sure that my community has water to drink. I will make sure that the organization that I'm running, and that may be a church, that may be the local food bank, that may be a massive corporation. But something that happens within a leader is there's an innate quality that says, I can do something here. I can, and I often talk about there's an innate leadership capacity in people. And we have that capacity, not everybody to the same extent, but it's what you do to cultivate that capacity that really starts to grow what we need in the way of leadership in the 21st century. But we're moving away from inherited leadership. If you had a title, if you had a name, if you came from a particular lineage, all of those other things, that's been the historical model in most societies. And yet in the middle, that's in the process of changing. But when you sit back and look at throughout history, some of our most effective leaders never came from such of those circumstances. So we're in this transition, Rick, from what I see of, well, it's your job. No, it's our job. But it does require some commitment inside. I've never met a leader who's made a difference that doesn't have courage. That's one of the requirements. One of the other requirements is you're not always going to go against the grain. You're not always. There's something in a leader that says, we can do something better, or I need to do this. I know for you personally, after you finished one of your big books, you thought, maybe I'm finished, and then the global compassion, the intention of that popped in, right? That was
As
a couple
my
of years
wife keeps
ago.
saying to me, what were you thinking?
I know. Well, but where did that come from? Because you could see that you could make something of a difference and you felt it was needed. And that's why I want to say, I really want to distinguish the difference between title and authentic authority. Okay.
Yeah. I'm struck first by your use of the word history. And as you well know, the models of leadership you're talking about inside patriarchy, highly hierarchical, based on, inherited nobility, as it were, so forth, the son of the son of the son of the king, and so forth. All that was a complete aberration from the hunter-gatherer forms of leadership and governance and power, which tended to be much more matrilineal, much more empowering of women and much more collective in bands of 40 or 50 people. As we study hunter-gatherer bands, they do tend to have leadership structures. Some of that tends to tilt male, but it's not at all as it was during the last 5,000 years of history with a written record, and the 5,000 years before that with, cities being able to gather with hierarchical structures after agriculture came in. So it's wild to appreciate that the new forms of leadership you're describing are actually the old forms of leadership.
They are.
That worked for 97% of the time our ancestors have walked this planet. And why do you think they're more necessary than ever these days, including as the nature of work changes?
Well, I think because we're dealing, when you sit back and look at the hunter and gatherers, and again, if any of you really want to spend some time, I suggest you go to one of Rick's great talks on the fact.
These are
called Taking
unsolicited
in the
plugs,
Groove.
by the way. These are unsolicited.
No. Pay attention to how we evolved and so forth. And
Yeah.
I think when we were living in a period of uncertainty and we knew one another, there was a trusting relationship that developed over time. And as we get into this conversation, we're going to talk about psychological safety. Well, when you look at where we're facing in the world today, there's so much uncertainty about everything. Okay, it was uncertain before the pandemic, and now it's just been accelerated. Where do we work? Who do we work with? And we are dealing, of course, with climate change, which you spoke about fairly regularly just last week with one of your talks. And so we're dealing with so many of the old structures are no longer appropriate. They're not working. They're breaking down. And so we're having to sit back and say, how do we come together and address these issues? And that hierarchical structure creates silos. That hierarchical structure creates limits of inclusion and the ability to look at things from different perspectives. And I want to go back to the fact when you said, when you look at major change, and you and I both know we both have an interest and affinity towards Africa and South Africa. The change in South Africa that brought around the end of apartheid came from a bunch of kids who got together in their 17, 18, and 20s and said, this isn't right. We're not just the disaffected. We're not the whatever. And so it's that we're in one of those huge influxes, Rick, of time. And I think that's partly why you created the Global Compassion Coalition, is wait a minute, we're at this irreversible influx of time and our old models are just not working. And so but the wonderful thing I can tell you is there's a tremendous readiness and an expectation to move forward in this in a different way. And that keeps me just genuinely excited that no, there is a growing recognition. It ain't working. And so old structures fall down so that new ones can come forward. And that's why I think we're sitting there, is we can't address the complexities and the global nature of our work. What goes on in one part of the world has a massive effect someplace else. We didn't used to think that, but it was still having an impact. But it's right in our face right now. And there's a hunger, there's a dissatisfaction with the old way. And there is a hunger for how do we do this differently, which is my passion. Okay. How do we do it differently?
So, Marguerite, post-pandemic, how do you feel people's attitudes towards work has changed, and what does that mean in terms of leadership?
Okay, well, first, let's talk just a little about what the pandemic did. Who would have thought that not just a state or a town or a country, but an entire society would in fact go into lockdown? Yes, in different forms and in different ways, but nobody could have imagined that. You couldn't have legislated it. You couldn't have said, oh, this is what we're going to do. It's because people were afraid for their lives, because there was an epidemic, which became a pandemic that was spreading everything. And so all of a sudden, so many of the rules changed. The notion of coming to work. Oh, you're going to have to work from home. Oh, you're not getting on a plane. Oh, thankfully, we have something called the internet and we can do things virtually. You could never have legislated that. The outside necessity required it, just like climate change is requiring the necessity of changing things. So all of a sudden, people are working from home, or they're working at a distance, and they're beginning to sit back and say, oh, by the way, everybody thought that the notion is when you don't come to work and you're not in with your colleagues, guess what? Productivity is going to fall apart. Well, part of the reason was the notion that people have to be supervised. Well, interestingly enough, during the pandemic, in working environments, productivity went up.
Hmm.
They didn't go down. I mean, it showed again and again because people were taking the responsibility. And I've been very involved in conversations as corporations are saying, and organizations, you have to go back into the office. And so many people are saying, but why? We don't need to. Well, what if we have to supervise people? And see, this is the moving away of people have to be supervised. And the conclusion was, guess what? The people that weren't doing very much work in the office are still not doing very much work at home. And so how we do work, the nature of work, the desire for work-life balance is just up in everybody's faces right now. So that precipitated a rethinking of so many things that we're in the process of working through, including how do we educate people? It's not just it's not just in work, it's everything. Just think about how your patterns change. Well, patterns break down so new ones can emerge. Does that help answer the question, Rachel? So I think that expectations are entirely different, and corporations that succeed are going to have to make that adaptation. People are leaving work if they have to come in and they don't think they have to. But that restructures what is power, what is authority, what is self-responsibility to get the work done. So instead of working towards, people are working more towards outcomes as opposed to punching the clock. That's part of it.
And what do you consider in terms of meaning? So people's desire for more meaning in their workplace, and how can leaders take that on board more?
Well, Rachel, something has really significantly changed. And you and I have spoken of it, and Rick, I'm sure you've observed it in your private consultations and so forth. Is in the past, people were grateful to just have a job. Okay, if I had a job, that means I could put food on the table. My mortgage would get paid. Um, um, I would put up with unhealthy work environments because necessity required it. I may not like it, but I'll hang in there and then I'll get to retirement. That is the mindset. Well, the mind shift has shifted in that the much younger generations are only interested, I would say, from anybody from about 30 and below, are saying, I want to do something worthwhile. I want to make sure that the work I'm doing is making a difference. And it's not all about all of the things and the toys that I gather. I need some of those. But it's a mind shift. It's a shift in values. It's a shift in what can I do to make a difference in the world? Because guess what? We're facing difference. We can't run away and pretend that what we're dealing with in so many different ways, different ways, we're just dealing with unprecedented things we've not had to grapple with as human beings before. So people want to be in the mix. And I think that that's the other opportunity of how do we create new ways of interacting? How do we engage with one another?
So on that note, what do you see as being the step forward in terms of new leadership models?
Well, I think that part of why I focused on, so I'm going to step back for a second and say, why did I spend so much of the majority of my life for the last 15 years on leadership? Is the first part of my professional career was doing strategy work for organizations, for people. And we developed these elaborate plans. And then that was first 12 years. I've spent the rest of my life trying to understand why we don't implement them. Resistance to change, old ways of doing things. But when you really sit back and look at it, when if anything is really going to happen, you have to have leadership. And so that's when I really focused in on leadership. And there are a variety of different models of leadership that we can talk about. But my focus has been transformational leadership, because if you even think about the term what is transformation? It's called not status quo. It's not status quo leadership, okay? It's not crisis leadership. It's how do we transform? And that's what's desperately needed. We need to transform organizations. We need to transform community groups. So it's a particular kind of leadership that enables leaders to step forward and take on the responsibility, not just for themselves, but how do you bring others along? And so there's a whole body of work that started to come out in the 70s around transformational leadership. And research was done globally, and there are 4 very clear qualities of transformational leadership. So I think that that's what we need right now is genuinely people who have the capacity to step into and know how to do transformational leadership. And it's not a mystery. It's good evidence. We know what's needed, but it starts from the inside out. So does that give you a sense? I mean, I could give you so many different labels on leadership. There are hundreds of books written on leadership, but I think what we need right now, or at least what I'm focusing on, is transformational leadership when the status quo and the old ways just simply don't work.
Mm-hmm. Well,
What
could
are
you
those
give us
4?
a little?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
those
Rachel.
4 key domains of transformational
Yeah,
leadership.
don't like leave us hanging here, Marguerite.
Okay, well, I thought I set
Give
you
us
up
the
really
juice.
well.
Yeah.
I led you right into it. Okay. So the first one, and again, if you want, I can put out references and so forth, but the first one is called idealized influence. Okay. And what does that mean? It means role modeling. Does the leader actually walk the talk and set the example to their followers? Okay. So you're not going to believe somebody. One of the things I say to people as I'm coaching leadership, guess what? They're always watching. The minute you step into a leadership role, give up some of the notion that nobody's paying attention. And so the whole notion of do what I say and not what I do does not follow anymore. So people, first of all, you have to be able to walk your talk. Do you do what you say? But if you don't do that, you don't have any credibility. The next one is inspirational motivation. You have to have an inspiration of where are we going? People are saying, okay, we're dealing with uncertainty. Where are we headed? You look at those young people who, the Stoneman down in Florida that sat through things. They sat up and said, you know what? We think gun violence needs to stop. You look at so many, not young, but other people saying, this is not acceptable. So you have to have, but it's not enough to just say it's not working. It's all screwed up. It's called, there has to be a constructive answer. And I just remember, and Rick, I remember part of what grew out of the Compassion Coalition was you're sitting around and you're looking at social media that does nothing but feed the negativity and said, wait a minute, we need a platform. So that, but there's a vision about that. So that's the next one. You have to have a sense that people can feel, where are we going? How do we get there? The next one is literally challenging the status quo. If we're not happy, quit complaining. But instead of just complaining and throwing rocks at what's existed, what is it that, how can we look at things differently? How do we organize the way in which we build houses? How do we organize how we manage to create food for people? How do we look at things? How do we come to terms with this? So it's a rejection. You can say, thank heavens it got us to this particular place. If we didn't have electricity, you and I wouldn't be talking right now. Okay. But are we consuming electricity correctly? So the third one is just a rejection of the very beginning, is it's not going to be the way it used to be. Let's figure out what that needs to look at. And so and people get excited about that. The first thing that happens when we're dealing with so much unchanged is we move into fear. We take a breath. Am I going to survive? What's this? What do I have to hold on to? But when you start getting people energized is, let's get moving. And again, the thing that surprises me so much, that doesn't surprise me. But Rick, how long is the Global Compassion Organization? Maybe 18 months, maybe not even that long. And you've got close to 100,000 people because people are hungry. What is this? What's going on? So the notion of stimulation and rejection of the status quo. But the fourth one, which is really important, is recognizing that not everybody is the same. You have to be able to deal with a team and come to terms with, what is that person particularly good at? It's called individualized consideration, okay? So you need to come to terms with, okay, so you want to work at home. I still need you to produce. Can we come to some agreement with when I need you in the office and when I don't need you in the office? One of the things that I know, because I was spending a little bit of time with Rachel just yesterday, is I wanted to know, so what else are you up to? What's going on? And so a good leader recognizes that you're not just trying to put people into boxes, you're not categorizing. And so a transformative leader, a transformational leader has those qualities. Now, how do you update it? What do you do? But those are the 4 qualities that if you look throughout history, the truly remarkable people across the globe, it's not unique to any particular culture, they've had those qualities. And that's what I've spent so much of my life paying attention to, both looking at historical figures, but contemporary figures. And so a contemporary figure, and again, I luckily have spent a lot of time in other countries, but a contemporary figure I like to follow is I follow Steve Kerr, who's the coach of the Golden State Warriors, because he's a transformational leader. If you really sit back and look at it, he's reintroduced, every year he gets a different team. He figures out, how does this come together? He's introduced the notion of, remember, it's a basketball game. This is what we need to do. But so one of the most interesting conversations is what if you sit back and say, whoa, who are the people who have new ideas? What are they doing? And they can be huge. You look at Mark Benioff, who created Salesforce, and he was the one who came up with the notion of, wait a minute, we can put CDs into our things, and all of a sudden you have a system that works. But what if we put it all in the cloud? Okay, so the notion of transformational leadership goes across cultures, it goes across industries. It's a way of being in the world. Does that help give you, Rick? Have I helped just a little defining it, Rachel?
You
Yeah, no,
definitely.
definitely.
It makes me think about a comment from, I'll pull up the name of the person. People can see this, Colette in Atlanta. I have a quiet kind of leadership. I don't have a position of authority, but when I chose to speak, everyone listens. And often the energy changes as a result of my speaking up. And I'm struck by, how can I put it, the sense of basically surrendering to that which is living through us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think great leaders surrender to the moment that is living through them. I'm right now recalling the image of the black and white photograph of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Thich Nhat Hanh, taken in probably the early 1960s. And you just see both of them as being lived by the moment in a way that involved a combination of dignity, gravity, deep moral concern, and inner peace with an open heart. They were lived by what came through them. I think we can also feel that in leadership in our home. How do parents lead in their home when they have teenagers, right? How can one person lead in a couple when there are inequities in the stress load and the workload? One person is sitting around watching TV, the other person is doing all the stuff, right? How do we do that? So I think about, I guess the first point I'm making here is about that felt sense of being lived by an honorable purpose, giving over to it. I think that's the servant leader model in a lot of
Yes.
ways. And what does that feel like? And how do we help ourselves trust that current, of important values and certain virtues that are living through us for the sake of the greater good, even if what we're doing is creating a new business startup or a new restaurant. So that would, maybe I'll just ask you about that. What do you think helps people trust that sense of what they see and what they are authoring in the sense of their own agency, in a way, not to be a bully about it or a dominator about it, but to be quietly confident about what is flowing through you, including the moral dimensions of it.
Yeah. Well, you quoted a young, and I did not get her name, but she said she's a quiet leader.
Yeah.
And she doesn't say a lot, but when she stands up, people listen.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because what she says is truthful. They know that she has integrity. One of the first things that happens when people, there's a whole, when do you gain credibility and when do you lose credibility? the interesting thing is when you do surveys of what people are looking for in their leaders, they rarely say they have to be the most intelligent or that they have to be always right or anything like that. Again and again and again. And I've done this in my own work, but I always go to data. I always go to research. It doesn't need to be my opinion. What does it show? Guess what shows up at the very beginning? Integrity. People care about integrity. People care, and it comes out, and when we do this survey, we put it in the language of the people. So integrity is an English word, but there's an equivalent word in Chinese or in Vietnamese or in Italian, okay? Another one is courage. Somebody who is not afraid to stand up for what they believe in. Interestingly enough, Rick, this has come up, and I think it has really come up much more in the last 10 to 12 years, is people are looking for kindness, compassion. They're looking for, is this person a decent human being? I mean, you can have integrity, but you slice people to the bone, okay, with your truthfulness and so forth. And so it's a fascinating thing that when across cultures, people have a sense of, can I trust this person? Again, you can be intelligent, you can do all of these other things. And that's why so much of my work has focused on transforming the way in which we think about what leadership is, because we spent the last 60 or 70 years across the globe creating a whole lot of very skilled, intelligent, technical experts that I think we've left some of our humanity behind. And so if you really, because if you're leading, people have to believe that you know what, first of all, and by the way, you don't have to have all the answers, but are you willing to explore? And this is going to sound, I have never met truly an effective leader that has not gone through some serious losses, has gone through some serious failures, some serious heartbreaks. That's a deepening of the heart and a deepening of the soul that is there. And it can be at a personal level, it can be at an economic level, it can be at a societal level. But as you cultivate that, and it's so easy to say, well, that happens as you get older. No, think about what young people are going through right now as we speak, as they're watching on the media. What's the wars that are happening everywhere? I didn't grow up watching those wars. My father was in World War II. My brother was in the Navy, but it was always at a distance. The wars are in our face right now. Now, much of the world has lived through those wars. So there's also that notion of humility that comes forward. And so the quiet leader, one of the things I often say is some of our greatest leaders are strong introverts, but they have cultivated within themselves. Self-knowledge is where it starts, Rick. I often talk about, if you're really trying to grow your leadership, start with working from the inside out. Start with self-awareness and self-management, which are the qualities of emotional intelligence. That's what people are looking for. Yeah.
You're speaking here, actually, wonderful stuff. And you're, in your way, you're answering a question that came in from Christine Claghorn, hello, Christine, who writes, I'd love to hear more about creating psychological safety as a leader. What are some ways to cultivate safety in a working environment? And you've named a bunch of them. I wondered if you want to add some more. And I think implicit in so many of them is compassion. Compassion for others, compassion for oneself, the recognition of difficulty with a caring response, a motivation toward relieving suffering. Did you want to add any others for ways in which leaders can create safety?
Well, yes, but I also want to give you a context for that as well. And because I always try to go back to saying, what are people feeling? What are we dealing with right now? And so in 2020, before the pandemic, before the pandemic hit, it was probably 2019 to 2020. There was a huge study done here in the United States, but it was also done globally. And the question was, what are you looking for in your working environment? And what they were looking for is something called, we're looking for a safe and respectful workplace. That's what people are looking for. So that's the expectation. In 2020, I want to work in a place where I feel safe and I feel respected. That's number one. And yet The next part of the survey was, and how is your current work environment? And something like 65% of the people responded and said, either I watch one of my colleagues suffer a microaggression or harassment or bullying. And so there is a disconnect, Rick, between what has been tolerated in behavior and what people's expectations are. And we're seeing this being played out on the global stage, okay? There's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of those other things. But when you look and say, what creates a safe and respectful work environment? A safe and respectful work environment is one in which people can make mistakes. They can make mistakes, they can take risks. People do not like to be judged or shamed or embarrassed. And a place where there is psychological safety is, guess what? We're in this together. And this is hard. I think that's the other thing about a good leader, is not pretending that it's easy to solve these problems. These are complex. People know when you're saying one thing and you don't, excuse me, and you don't believe it. But the whole notion of you're not going to be punished. People will not take a risk if they think that they have to be perfect all the time and there's no chance to make an error. And so that's why, but that's at the core. Until you have a psychologically safe environment, you do not have, you never get to high performance. I pay attention to kind of what's going on within Tesla. And you can't say that Elon Musk is a particularly benevolent or kind or generous work boss, and I would call him a boss. He may be an intellectual leader and a technological leader, but he's not a real leader. He's a boss. And when he takes something over, he imposes a series of, you're going to work 80 hours. You're going to do this. You have, by the way, since I took over Twitter, you now have to come in and you better be loyal or you're out of here. My way or the highway. That's not what people look for. Is that helping flesh out the notion of psychological safety? Psychological safety has to be present for people to be willing to innovate, to try, to do all of those other things. And I can tell you, the successful modern corporations recognize that. And so when they're recruiting people, guess who are the people who are willing to create safe environments? People with strong capacities for emotional intelligence. They have a level of emotional intelligence. And when you look at emotional intelligence and its four competencies, the first one is self-awareness. And again, emotional intelligence, not intelligence, brain intelligence. And guess what? Emotional intelligence never came in. When I was in business school in the late 70s and early 80s, and I know I'm dating myself, it was called, it's all business. Leave the emotions out. Well, guess what? We carry them with us anyway. Now, every single business school, every single university, every single companies are teaching emotional intelligence because so self-awareness. How am I feeling? And then self-management. How am I managing myself? But the next one is social. How are you feeling? How are you feeling as a human being? What are your feelings? Have you walked a mile in another person's shoes? All of a sudden, when you start paying attention to that and paying attention to the context in which they're working, you're tapping into empathy, which inevitably leads to compassion. And so you're not going to get people saying, I want to be a compassionate leader. That rule, people go, well, is that too soft for me? But the evidence shows that if you do not have strong emotional intelligence, you're not going to progress in your career because you've got to get other people who are willing to work with you. You can be smart, but you can't frighten people into high performance. You can for a little period of time, but not in the long run. Christine, I hope that fleshed it out.
Thank you. And on that note of maybe certain people being a little bit, there being sort of trepidation to sort of say or embody compassionate leadership. I was wondering, what do you see as being like some of the fears or the blocks to embracing the compassionate approach? It sounds like perhaps like language may be one of them and kind of the heaviness of certain words, but are there anything else?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned, just so that you know, in my years in working across cultures, is you have to be sensitive to the literal words and language of that culture. And so the language of business is not necessarily going to jump into compassion, okay? That comes from a different framework. But if you start talking about, but you must have a level of emotion. So again, as I said, 15 years ago, emotional intelligence, we don't need to do that. Now it's readily accepted. It's readily accepted. I mean, there was a 2021 interview or an article of interviewing people from Google is how do you recruit people? And they said, well, when we're looking at candidates, we look at 5 emotional intelligences. We want to see, we have 5 questions. So anybody that comes in has to demonstrate some sensitivity to another person. So I think you have to adapt some of the language that is being used so at the core of compassion is kindness, a willingness to accept others, opening your heart, all of those other things. People are afraid of that because it looks weak. I laugh so much because people will say, well, those are the soft skills. Well, the soft skills are some of the hardest in the world to create. It's one thing to master a particular technology or a particular knowledge base, but to, oh my goodness, to actually begin to engage with people, that's the next level of engagement and leadership as you move forward. Does that help, Rachel, to flesh that out in terms of how do we introduce more compassion? I think you have to make some adaptation to the work environment. How does that get to it? Well, guess what? A psychologically safe work environment has compassion in it. An environment in which risk is taken, productivity goes up, morale goes up, all of the things that businesses pay attention to in terms of measures of success. When you have psychological safety, wow, it's there. But I can tell you psychological safety was not introduced into the work environment until about 7 or 8 years ago. So the thinking about how organizations are and how we work is there. And I just think it's so interesting that when Rick started at the beginning, we're kind of going back to the way we used to be in hunter-gatherers, small communities. How do we trust each other? There has to be a high level of trust as it comes forward.
And on that note, on the idea of trust, are there any sort of core beliefs that you need to have as a leader, one about yourself, but also about the way the world works, and also other people, the people that you're leading, in order to really embrace this?
Well, so first, yeah, I think first and foremost, if you really pay attention to genuinely effective leaders, is they get to be pretty comfortable in their own shoes, which means they have done some of the inner work of self-acceptance. They're not perfect. None of us are perfect, but there is a recognition of I'm a decent human being and I have something to contribute. So there has to be some of that component of that's number one, is I believe in myself. I am competent in what I know. I'm confident enough. I think another component is you have to have a growth mindset. If you're expecting to know all the answers and know how to do things perfectly from the beginning, you're dead in the water, because whenever we take on new things, we're never going to be perfect. So there's a set of qualities of I am who I am, and I'm continuing wanting to grow, and I'm wanting to learn. I think that's one of the qualities. I think there has to be a genuine interest and commitment to another person. I've found to other people, it's not just all about you. It's not just all about people who look like you or think like you. It's about how do we figure all of this together? Because when you get underneath culture, and so my curiosity has always been, what makes people tick, not what does make white people or black people. We all have different, or purple people, or highly educated or uneducated. At the core, we're human beings first. How do we get back into that? And the people who are really effective have done the work to say, here's who I am. As Rick announced at this very beginning, he said, I'm in the autumn of my life. I'm in the autumn of my life. Rachel, you're in the, I would say you're probably in the spring moving into summer of your life, if you want to use seasons, okay? I'm definitely in the autumn of my life. I'll be 73 next week, and this is probably my last chapter, and it's moved from doing research on infants to consulting to now teaching and transitioning things. And so I think that is critically there. But if you genuinely are not, if you don't care about other people, you're never You'll be tolerated, and even if you amass huge amounts of power, you're never going to be that successful. Does that help answer some of your questions, Rachel?
Yeah, definitely. And I was just curious, what has helped you to kind of keep that sense of common humanity alive, like in both in terms of personal practice and just in terms of your life? What has helped you to stay cognizant of that and to live that?
Well, fortunately, I grew up in a little tiny mining town 7 miles from the border of Mexico and Arizona. And I grew up in a multicultural setting. I won't go into any of that, but I grew up into a small town where people knew one another. But we had half of the high school class that I graduated with were Mexicans. And it was a small, when I say a graduating class of 150, okay, we're not talking about anything that was big. But my parents always engendered a curiosity about other cultures and other ways of doing things. I had that natural interest. But I've always found people who don't look like me and act like me curious and interesting. So I think having a curiosity as opposed to being frightened about it. But I came from a safe environment, meaning I didn't live under the threat of, I mean, we certainly were not affluent, but there was never any doubt about food on the table. We rode around on, but this is in the 50s and 60s. The world has changed since then. But I think for me, it's having an innate curiosity of what the heck's going on over there. And instead of sitting back and saying, don't they know what they're talking about? Saying, I can look at it differently. This is going to sound really crazy. But one of the things, whenever I go down into South Africa, but again, I've done in other African countries, when I'm in South Africa, the very first thing I have to do is adjust to the fact that they drive on the different side of the road. They drive on the same road that England does. And I used to sit back and say, well, they're on the wrong side of the road. Well, from their perspective, I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. And so guess what? I go from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. So they're moving into their summer solstice. We're moving into our winter solstice. So everything gets turned around. And who's right? It's different. And so if you can keep that curiosity and say, oh, there's something that I can learn. I can tell you one of the things that has been wonderful about people and living in the pandemic is people are recognizing there's some things we can do virtually and there's some things we can't do virtually, that we need to physically see one another in person. I mean, there are a whole lot of communication challenges that come up when we're living in a virtual environment. But now people are coming back together, and they're recognizing coming together is not so much to check in on each other and are you doing the work, but so people are saying, bring a potluck, bring your favorite meal, see what that looks like. There's an opening and a curiosity that the truth is we live in a multicultural world. I mean, I think you're from England, but you were telling me you ended up in the Canaries because you were dating a man, or you had a partner who was a Spanish. I mean, the EU is all about mixing everything up together. And so I just think there's, instead of being afraid, being curious about it. And I think when you walk into a situation in that environment with the expectation that nobody's out to do you in, it sets up an expectation of curiosity and learning. And life is so much more interesting that way. It's just every day is a joy, okay? Of, whoa, I didn't know about that culture. So being open as opposed to judgmental. But again, I was blessed with so much love that was poured into me as a child. And my innate curiosity. I grew up in an environment where it was expected that women would do well. So I never had to overcome the notion of I wasn't appreciated or expected. I had as many high expectations as my brother did. And so I didn't carry that particular baggage. So it makes me very comfortable interacting with highly competent women and men. But I mean, as I said, there wasn't a lot of economic riches, but there was such heartful richness that I grew up in.
That's beautiful. What are some of the practical steps that people can take to become transformational leaders, including accessing the wealth of materials that you freely offer, of course, links to which we post? But what are steps people can take to become better leaders themselves?
Well,
courses you offer, resources on your website, books you suggest?
Yes, I'll definitely do that. I mean, so one of the things I had to do, just so you know, is until the pandemic, the vast majority of my work was all in person because I love getting out and being involved and having that group interaction. And the pandemic changed all of that. And so even within graduate school, which teaches personal development, everything had to move virtually. So I've spent the last year and a half, Rick, learning what you know how to do, was how do we offer things virtually? How do we get to where we're going? And
Yeah,
so
I think of them, by the way, I think of them as virtual. To me means unreal. They're real. They're just
they are very
online.
real. They're
Yeah.
online. Exactly.
Yeah.
They're online. And
Yeah.
so there is that. But if you're really serious about starting your journey as a transformational leader, I'm going to have you start not with me, but I welcome you and I'll tell you some of the things I'm doing. But I would strongly recommend, and I'm probably going to go up and grab the book. I meant to bring it down, is sign up and buy the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And actually, bear with me for a second, Rick. I require everybody in any of my classes, and I do this, but this is Wall Street Journal bestseller, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And so guess who wrote the foreword? It's on the cover. Succinctly explains how to deal with emotions creatively and employ our intelligence in a beneficial way. The Dalai Lama, okay? Wall Street Journal, New York Times bestseller. It's a fabulous how-to book, and it's been around since 2009. It costs about $35, but they have strategies. And one of the best things is when you order the book, and you can get it electronically. And wherever I go, I make sure that the good bookstores has it. You get a passcode so you can do a self-appraisal. So if you start with that book, you've got a baseline of, whoa, I guess I'm not so good on self-awareness, or I'm really good on self-awareness, but I don't do relationships. But they don't just do an assessment. They'll give you with that thing. They'll go, well, here's some very practical strategies that you can do to increase in that particular area. And I love that because it's fabulous baseline work that's there. There are very good short courses on emotional intelligence. If you go to Travis Bradberry, who's one of the founders of Talent Smart, he's on LinkedIn. And if you want to get to any of my work, as it turns out, I'm going to be starting an online course in January, and it's called Mastering the 5 Essential People Skills for Career Advancement. Because, as I said before, I feel that we've got a lot of very technically trained individuals. We focus so much on STEM. We've focused so much on technological innovation. We focused on the science. But how do we bring our humanity back in? And so it's an 8-week course that's online. It's going to be offered asynchronously. And people through the end of that will develop some of their capabilities that are there. But many courses on certificates are there. I also am going to recommend for you, and again, Rick has written an amazing book just in 2023 called Having Great Relationships. And it's an audio book. One of the things that Rick has done is he's very good when he writes his audio book. I mean, he reads his own books, and he's got a good teaching voice. And
Thank you. Keep moving.
Okay. But anyway, in it really talks about being on your own side. I mean, he's bringing his years of interpersonal interaction. So I think that's a really good resource. I think there are a lot of things that you can honestly do. I'm running a variety of different workshops. If you really are committed, I have a year-long program on transformational leadership. But I prefer to do that not with individuals, but with a group as a whole. So if people are interested, they can sign up for my website. I'm also doing weekly blogs called Leadership in the Unknown. And I'm going to be giving every week, I'm going to be giving exercises that are all free of a homework assignment, because it's one thing to think about it. It's another thing to have to practice it. Leadership is a never-ending ongoing journey. It's a lifelong journey of excitement and exploitation. and exploration. We have seen plenty of exploitation of people who call themselves leaders and their bosses, but I think that that's part of what really is available. But I'll make sure, Rick, that I give to at the end of this so that you can include. I'll include some other links of other resources that I have found. You can get certificates on transformational leadership. You can get masters of courses, but I don't think it takes that long. I think we can start it right now. And again, so much of it is, don't look at yourself with a title. Look at yourself as, am I willing to step up and pick up the little piece of my world that I can make a difference into? And let's get going. I mean, that's what's needed right now. And I come away, you just need to know, every time I finish teaching something or I finish interacting, I'll go, you know what, we're going to get there. It's going to be hard. And believe me, I am not a Pollyannish. I have to face a whole host of complicated situations, even within my own life. But we're going to get there as a society, because innately we are good people. Innately we want to do better by one another. Innately we care deeply. And it's just giving ourselves permission and finding ways in which there are constructive outlets for that. But love yourself. I mean, I've really had to come to terms. I really am happy with myself as a human being. I'm very grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to have this conversation. Is start within yourself. Have a joyful heart to the extent that you can, even through the sorrows. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Lots of goodness there. And thank you for those resources, Marguerite. We are running out of time, but there was a question from Pablo who asked for any advice around conflict management.
Oh, yes. I actually have a whole section on conflict. Well, there's a great couple of resources on becoming a constructive conflict. I will tell you, because we are running out of time, I'm going to put in the link a couple of TED Talks and ways to look at it. TED Talks are a good thing to use as a resource, but there are some wonderful tools about that. And when I'm putting out my blog, one of the things, conflict is one of the issues that we have to come to terms with. People either love conflict or hate conflict, but we're in conflict. And we have got to move beyond. Our solution to conflict is kill the other person. Emotionally, psychologically, physically, we've got to find a way to work through it. And there's finding compassion in conflict is there. And Rick, there's a very good interview, I think, around conflict in the Global Compassion Workshop. There's something along those lines. So
yeah,
there are resources.
I taught a workshop on compassion in conflict.
That's right.
It's easy to have compassion for people that are all lovey-dovey, right? How do we do it when the gloves come off? So keep going. Yeah.
That's right. No, I think that's right. So inherent, you just need to know, inherent in transformational leadership, you're going to run into conflict because you're in the process of making changes. But there are constructive ways of approaching it, and compassion is the thing. But you have to come to terms with what your own style of conflict is, because some people feed on conflict and other people run away from it. And what I've learned, and again, I did not grow up in a conflicted household or an environment. These people who have been through a lot of conflict hate it. And so they tend to be conflict avoiders. And yet in their roles, they have to learn how to be effective. So like anything else, it's a skill set. It's a skill set that can be developed. But first you have to come to terms with, how do you handle conflict, and how do I come to terms with, how do I change some of those things? So again, that could be a whole other conversation, but this is enough. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been really great to be with you, and you so clearly embody your own teachings. And I think about myself. One of the, I think, skills of a good leader is to pursue fertile ground and not try to grow roses in a parking lot. And
Absolutely.
One version of that is, as my son reminds me repeatedly, Dad, don't feed the trolls, right? We can get really caught up trying to get blood from some stone or trying to grow rose in a parking lot where there's just not support for it, including in conflict. And we could start recognizing that some people will never change their view. There's an old line that you cannot convince somebody of something that it is their paycheck not to believe. In other words, there are
That's right.
incentives, right? And so at some point, I think it's important to keep pursuing where is fertile ground? Who are the people that are our natural allies? Instead of trying to convince our opponents and adversaries, why not build our allies or the people who are undecided, in the middle? As Brene Brown put it, write for your fans, not your critics. So,
That's a beautiful way. No, that's right. I mean, and frankly, when you deal with change management, you're never going to convince the people that don't believe in it. Don't waste your time on it. There's
and
a
are
whole
highly
group of other
incented to
people,
maintain the
highly
status
incented.
quo.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So then in that spirit, I want to thank you as someone who's been very effective in changing the status quo and promoting compassionate leadership around the world. What a legacy, what a life, what a beautiful contribution. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you.
Marguerite.
Thank you all. And I ain't done yet. Okay. All
That's
right.
right. That's
Yay.
right. What's the line? Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. That's how the light gets in. There is a
That's
crack in
right.
everything. There we go. Leonard Cohen. Ring the bells that still can ring. Yeah.
All right. Ding, ding,
Hey.
ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Ding, ding, ding.
All righty. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rachel.
you.
It's been a real
Thank you.
pleasure to spend the
Thank
hour with you.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.